Millers, Susan, Billy, and Mr. Miller. They're going to take a trip to a big bakery, at least Susan is. Billy doesn't think a bakery's so important. Not so important, says Susan? Why, each day they bake a loaf of bread for every family. Mrs. Miller wants to know where Susan left the sifter. You see, Susan has been learning about baking, but she has never been to a bakery. She wonders what they need to bake in the bakery. Well, Mrs. Miller says they have to have a place to store flour, a sifter to sift it, a measuring cup to measure it, a mixer to mix the flour into dough, and a rolling pin to roll and flatten the dough, and, of course, an oven to bake it in. Mr. Miller asks Billy if there's anything he wonders about the bakery. He asks Billy if he's ever wondered what happens to the donut hole. Well, Susan is ready to go to the bakery. Now she has a lot of things to find out. But Billy, well, he's just not quite sure that he wants to go. He says he'll stay here and finish up these donuts. But Billy wonders, what did happen to the donut hole? Maybe there is something he can find out about the bakery. Wait a minute. Billy's changed his mind. He wants to find out what does happen to the donut hole. This is the big bakery. And this is the storage room where flour first comes in the bakery. A month ago, says Mr. Miller, this flour was brought into the bakery. Then it was not ready for use. Like green bananas, you know. Bananas ripen in a few days, but flour takes 30 days to ripen. Bakers call this mellowing. When the flour has mellowed, it is ready to be used. A worker takes the flour to a big hopper where it is emptied. Each bag weighs 100 pounds. Well, now that's almost as much as both Billy and Susan together. Watch how carefully each bag is emptied. Do you remember Mrs. Miller's sifter? Well, this is the sifter the bakery uses. And after sifting, the flour is stored in big tanks like these. It's now ready to be added to the two bread mixes. This is the table where the baker gets the other things ready for the first bread mix, called the sponge. They are yeast and vitamin tablets. They are put into a little mixer. Water is added, and they are mixed together. When they've been mixed, they go through pipes to the big sponge mixer. The baker pulls the handle, and the scale weighs out exactly 360 pounds of flour, just the right amount. It takes the big sponge mixer only 4 minutes to mix the flour with the yeast, vitamins, and water. This is the finished sponge. It is put in a trough. The sponge trough looks like a big wagon. It is pushed into a special room called the fermentation or warm room, and inside the warm room the baker weighs the sponge. Mr. Miller says the sponge is left in the warm room. He says it has to rise for 4 hours. This sponge is just starting to rise. Mr. Miller says the yeast makes the sponge rise. The room is warm, so it will rise faster. This sponge has been rising for 4 hours, and now it is ready to be mixed into dough. The sponge is pushed back into the mixing room. Watch how the trough of sponge is put into the big dough mixer. It is placed in the rack, lifted up, and emptied. Now the baker gets the other things ready for the second bread mix called the dough. They are sugar, milk solids, and salt and shortening. They are in the baker's measuring cups. They are put in this mixer. More water is added, just exactly the right amount. and then they go through pipes to the big dough mixer. 240 more pounds of flour is added, and the dough is mixed in just 10 minutes. This is the finished dough. Do you remember all the things that are in the dough? The dough is put in a trough, too, but this trough is not the same. It looks more like a boat than a wagon, and it has a gate on one end. The dough trough is also pushed into the warm room. Now you can see the gate. In 30 minutes, the dough will rise and fill the trough like this. When this light goes on, the bakers downstairs are ready to use the dough. The gate is opened, and the risen dough slides out of the trough and down the chute to the divider. The divider cuts or divides the dough into pieces. Each piece will become a loaf of bread. But the pieces are sticky and lumpy, so they go to the rounder. The rounder makes them into smooth balls of dough. And Mr. Miller says the dough is also sprinkled with flour so it won't be sticky. The balls of dough then go to a warm box called a proofer. In the proofer, the dough rises for 10 minutes. Well, this is okay, says Billy, but what about the donut hole? Well, we'll find out in a moment. From the proofer, the dough goes to the sheeter. Now, the sheeter works like Mother's rolling pin, and it flattens each ball into a sheet of dough. Each sheet of dough is then molded by the molder. The molder rolls each sheet into a loaf. The loaves are dropped into pans, and a baker puts the pans onto a big cart. Mr. Miller says there's just one more step before baking. The loaves of bread, dough, are put inside a pan proofer for an hour. The pan proofer is like a little warm room. Do you remember what happens in the warm room? Here are loaves after and before the little warm room. Mr. Miller points to the big oven. He says the bread will be baked as soon as it comes out of the little warm room. Look, some is ready now. The pans of dough are placed inside the traveling oven. The oven is called a traveling oven because the bread travels or rides through. Look through the windows and see the bread bake on its ride. In only 30 minutes, the bread will be baked. And here it comes, baked at last. Mr. Miller says the oven bakes 2,000 loaves every hour. But the rides are not over. The fresh, hot bread is sent to the cooler. The bread is cooled for an hour and a half, and after cooling, a worker checks the bread before sending it to the slicer. Where the bread is sliced, the crumbs are brushed off, and then the fresh, clean bread is wrapped. A worker then puts the wrapped bread in trays like these. Mr. Miller says the trays are lined up, waiting to be loaded on trucks and sent to stores and homes. There goes some bread now, and Billy and Susan wave goodbye as the bread leaves the bakery. But the bakery bakes many things besides bread, says Mr. Miller, like cupcakes and pies. Just look at all those pies. And cakes. This is the way cakes are frosted. Billy wonders who gets to lick the pans. And this is a great big cake being decorated for a birthday party. Mr. Mr. Miller says the bakery also bakes cookies and rolls and coffee cakes. Well, what about the donut, says Billy. All right, Billy, says Mr. Miller, let's find out. Donut dough is mixed in a little mixer, like the one for bread dough. It is even dumped into a little trough. All right now, Billy. Watch closely. See, there never was a hole. At last, Billy has found out what happened to the donut hole. Now donuts go into a warm box, and inside the donuts rise. And then the risen donuts are fried, not baked, first one side and then the other. The fresh donuts are frosted like this. Then they're cooled, and then they're ready to eat. Like this. Billy and Susan say they've learned a lot about the big bakery. Now they know how it stores, sifts, measures, mixes, shapes, and bakes. And they thank their father for taking them to the big bakery. They just never knew a bakery could be so interesting.